Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this very exciting day today, the 5th of the 5th. Yes, 5th of the 5th, 2023, 15 degrees and mostly sunny right here in Brisbane. And hey, it's wonderful to have your company on this Friday. Are we all gearing up for the coronation? Well, tonight we will be attending a very, very special function for the coronation with fellow Order of Australia, the members at the very prestigious Tattersalls Club. They're very excited to be able to be invited to this very exclusive event and are completely sold out. There's so many people on the wait list. But last night there was a very good get-together of all the councillors together with a Lord Mayor discussing the future of property in Brisbane. Here's a quick look at that.
Is a topic on everyone's lips. Australians have this thing with housing where every Australian is an expert in the housing market. They think they are. And every Australian has an opinion on what's going to happen. Every Australian wants to pick the trends and know what's happening next. And a lot of people talk to us on a daily basis about what's happening with housing in Brisbane and southeast Queensland. But obviously at this point in time, the biggest question is how are we going to make sure we can provide homes for all the people that want to live here? And we've seen this incredible thing happen since the pandemic, where we've had so many people coming from other parts of Australia coming to live here and in Queensland, and that's only continued to accelerate as we were awarded the hosting rights for the Olympic and the Paralympic Games. There's a lot of excitement and interest in coming here, living here and establishing businesses here. We also now have people who are arriving from overseas again. So the international borders have opened up again, migration is happening again, and that's really going to be gearing up as well. So where is everyone going to live in Brisbane going forward? The question on everyone's lips, and tonight we want to give you a little bit of an insight in how we see the city changing and growing, but also how we protect the goose that lays the golden egg. And what I mean by that is how we protect the great things about Brisbane and not lose them as we go forward. Yes, we need to provide homes for so many more people, but we don't want to destroy our lifestyle and the livability of our city. So recently we released our sustainable growth strategy, which is our city's housing strategy and our city's homelessness strategy. That strategy is really about answering that question, where are people going to live? How are we going to meet the demand? Now before I go into that, I just wanted to give a snapshot on where we're at this point in time in terms of our current city plan and our neighbourhood planning process and what supplies out there. Through the combination of our existing city plan, which dates back to 2014, and also the neighbourhood plans that we've developed around the city, there's around 85,000 lots available or homes available right now as supply that's been effectively approved or endorsed that can be opened up. So 85,000. Having said that, that doesn't necessarily mean that 85,000 is going to happen this year or next year. It's supply that can be brought online, but it's also supply that has to have the right market conditions as well. As you know, in the industry, developers, builders may have an approval for something, but that doesn't mean that today it stacks up financially. And so 85,000 supply available, but over the coming years we need to provide more than 115,000 homes, and we need to also lift our gaze beyond that as well. Where do we go beyond that 85,000? Where are those homes going to be? Now around southeast Queensland, most of the other councils are looking at greenfield development. And so what I'm talking about here is house and land is how they will meet the housing supply.
So there you are, up to date on Australian Indian Radio, and there was just a glimpse of what was discussed there, and then the point that was made was that rather than chopping down trees and making the space for new residential areas, they'll be looking at, the council is more keen on looking at industrial places which are not being used for industry anymore. And they could be transformed into residential areas. Look at the example of Tenerife and, of course, New Farm. And right here, right next to us, the Howard Street Wharves, which was not being used for such a long time. And now it's a thriving, bubbling place. One of the questions I did ask in the question time was, okay, residential is what we are looking at because there'll be so many people coming to Brisbane, so they need a place to stay. But what about industries as well? We could not discard the industries. Unfortunately, industries are getting pushed further and further away from the city into more industrial precincts, which are in the very, very outer suburbs. That's where the industries are going or heading. But there is an overall decline in new industries being set up because the cost of manufacturing in Australia is very high. And it is not competitive in the international market. Of course, for the local consumption, for the government supply and other things like that, industries can be set up, but not on an export level. Look at what has happened to our car industry. It's not no more. And such would be the case with many other industries. So industries are, industries and that area, manufacturing area is facing a big challenge. Anyway, it was interesting. It was very, very interesting. One of the things that we talked about there was the rental and the rental supply as per this report.
The streets of Brisbane's West End are where Rhiannon's housing options ran out. After leaving home at 17, couch surfing, share houses and crisis accommodation, eventually there was only a footpath where she stayed awake all night.
It's terrifying. The reason why I didn't sleep was because I didn't want to be attacked.
Her stay at a hostel wasn't any better. Some residents were twice her age, and she witnessed constant drug use. She didn't feel safe.
It is pretty scary. Everyone's just kind of not in a good space, and it's the last resort.
Not so long ago, Rhiannon may have been able to get together with friends and rent a cheap property. Now that option seems out of reach. Advocates say a cascade effect is pushing more people into homelessness as those on middle incomes shift down to cheaper properties.
Then the person who can only ever really afford the cheapest property on the market, well, they're competing against someone on a higher income. They end up with nothing.
The residential vacancy rate has been around 1% for more than a year. It's never been this low for this long.
We've seen little bumps where rental vacancies drop to this sort of level just for a month and then bounce back, but it hasn't bounced back, and for the last year now we've been seeing extremely low vacancy rates across the country.
In Brisbane, Rhiannon got lucky. Her landlord is covering her rent temporarily. She's escaped homelessness for now.
Just seeing it in general, but also kind of living through it, it's pretty heartbreaking.
With so few affordable places to rent, she fears it wouldn't take much to make her homeless again. Norman Hermont, ABC News.
And that is a failing of our society. People leave homes for very, very different reasons and rely on going out and being on their own, looking at places to rent, and all of these things, in today's day and age, in a country like Australia, people should not be out having to live or spend nights out on the street or in a small tent in a park. So to me, that's a failing of the society as well. All right, now looking at that coronation fever that's happening on, and one of the things that will happen after the coronation is everyone will be asked to take that pledge. The pledge, to say that the support and allegiance to the king. There are, on social media, I have seen so much commentary on that. Some people are for it. Some people say, no way, not me. So what is our Prime Minister going to do?
Prime Minister, thanks so much for talking to the ABC.
Good to be with you, Steve.
A start date for the free trade agreement has been agreed upon between the UK and Australia. When will that be, and what will be the immediate benefits for Australia?
Well, it will be in place by May 31st. It's completed its parliamentary processes here, and of course we completed our processes at the end of last year. What it will mean, put simply, is more access to the market here for our goods and services. But it will also have changes to the labour market, increased periods in which Australians can work here and vice versa, and increased ages as well.
What are you looking forward to about the coronation on Saturday?
Well, it's a moment in history, isn't it? In our lifetime, this is the first time there's been a transition of power after his mother, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, served for 70 years, a remarkable period of service and diligence and duty that Queen Elizabeth showed over such a long period of time. And Saturday will be the formal recognition of the fact that we have a new head of state under our system.
And you're going to take the oath of allegiance to the King on Saturday. Why would a lifelong Republican do that?
Well, the same reason why we do it when we're sworn or affirmed into Parliament.
Except you have to do it then. You don't. This is voluntary. I mean, if, for example, the Archbishop of Canterbury is going to ask the congregation, and I'll quote, "all who desire to take the oath of allegiance." Sounds like you've got an out there.
Well, I think as the Australian Prime Minister, people expect me to not come to the King's coronation in order to create a controversy. And I'll follow protocol, just as I followed protocol with Her Majesty's death last year.
A lot of Australians may find this particular protocol a bit weird and a bit irrational, because you'll be taking an oath of allegiance not just to the King, but his heirs and its successors. That includes Prince Andrew. That includes people who haven't even been born yet, whose character you couldn't possibly evaluate. That must strike you as a particularly irrational oath.
Well, if people aren't born, it's unlikely I'll be here when they become the monarch. And Australia's constitutional arrangements, of course, are up to Australia in the future to determine. And King Charles is very much on the record as saying that he respects the right of nation states who are part of the Commonwealth to determine their own constitutional arrangements. And as a Republican, I think at some stage that will change when Australia is ready for that. But it's not up to me as Prime Minister to impose my position on Australia.
Julian Assange has been held in prison here in London for over 5 years now. Should his family and his friends and his supporters hold any optimism that this could be the year when the US finally drops those extradition proceedings against him?
Well, my position is that enough is enough, and I continue to say in private what I said publicly as Labor leader and what I've said as Prime Minister, that enough is enough. This needs to be brought to a conclusion. It needs to be worked through, including we're working through diplomatic channels, but we're making very clear what our position is on Mr Assange's case.
President Biden, who you describe as a friend, will be in Australia this month for the Quad. Will you be raising it again with him?
The way that diplomacy works, Steve, is probably not to forecast the discussions that you will have or have had with leaders of other nations. That's something that in the past, I'm not someone who will ever release a text message from another leader. I'll engage diplomatically in order to achieve an outcome. And I know it's frustrating. I share the frustration. I can't do more than make very clear what my position is, and the US administration is certainly very aware of what the Australian government's position is.
Just over a year ago, a coalition of 21 free speech and human rights organisations signed a letter calling on the US to drop the charges against Assange, saying the prosecution of Assange undermines the country's ability to defend journalists against repression by authoritarian and other rights-abusing regimes abroad. Now, this was before the war in Ukraine. This was before Russia charged an American journalist with espionage. Do you think the US needs to look at the Assange case in this context? What message it sends to authoritarian regimes?
I think that the Assange case needs to be looked at in terms of what occurred, what the allegations are, and whether the time effectively that has been served already is in excess of what would be reasonable if it were proved that this had occurred. When Australians look at the circumstances, look at the fact that the person who released the information is walking freely now, having served some time in incarceration, but is now released for a long period of time, then they'll...
So there you are, ladies and gentlemen, up to date on Australian Indian Radio. And the main question in that one that we were really interested is the Pledge of Allegiance to King Charles. And the Prime Minister there mentioned that, even though whatever their beliefs had been in the past, at this point in time, he's representing Australia, and as the head of Australia, as the Prime Minister of Australia, attending the King's coronation, he is going to take that pledge as well. And of course, there will be many functions and events happening in and around Australia and in and around the world for that matter. And as I mentioned before, a very, very high profile event is taking place tonight at the Tattersall's Club. And there's so many people on the wait list, and as soon as that was announced, within minutes it was sold out, and we are privileged to be invited to attend that with the acting governor. Why the acting governor? Because the governor is not here at this point in time. So it is going to be a wonderful event. And we'll bring you all the reports today. Unfortunately, we can't take photos. There are many protocols which we will have to follow. But again, that pledge of allegiance will be there. It is a divided matter, and I've seen so much commentary on social media. Some people for it and some people against that. Everyone's got their opinion. Now, keeping on with the Prime Minister, he hails the job creation by AUKUS submarine site.
Simple little bending task.
At the academy inside Britain's largest shipyard, it was the apprentices schooling the Prime Minister.
Success!
These teenagers could one day be building the next generation of AUKUS submarines. And Anthony Albanese wants the same opportunities for young Australians.
I was telling my mum about it before. I'm speaking to the Australian Prime Minister today, and it gives a real sense of meaning to your job. It's not just a 9 to 5, you actually got something important with it as well.
Yeah, I think it's definitely good for younger people, because just to know there's more opportunities for them.
Both countries see AUKUS as being about security and jobs.
I see this as being very similar to what the car industry provided for Australia in the post-war period. Industry that created jobs and security for communities.
There will be Australian hands making submarines in Barrow, and those hands will go back to Australia and make submarines in Australia.
While the Prime Minister was keen to spend the day talking about AUKUS and job opportunities, this trip is to a large degree about the coronation. And he also revealed a few scant details about his meeting with the monarch in the lead-up to the big day.
King Charles has a great love for and affection for Australia. He is very familiar with the range of issues that Australia is facing.
The Prime Minister says he will welcome a visit from Charles and Camilla once the coronation is over. Steve Kinane, ABC News.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, up to date on Australian Indian Radio. And now for our next news, we go to Western Australia.
With federal plans announced, the McGowan government was quick to point out disposable nicotine vapes are already illegal in the West.
WA has the most rigorous and toughest vaping regulations.
Selling nicotine vapes can see WA retailers fined up to $45,000. Last year, the Health Department showed off 15,000 seized vapes, and the government warned a crackdown was coming.
These have never been legal in Western Australia.
9 months on, and another 9,000 vapes have been seized, 50 store owners have been given warnings, but not a single retailer has been fined.
Well, confiscation of more than 20,000 vapes is a pretty significant impost on the businesses.
It doesn't matter how strict your laws are. If you don't actually enforce the fines, then the retailer will basically carry on, they'll get resupplied, and they'll carry on until they really get busted with a big fine.
Still now, disposable nicotine vapes can be easily purchased from convenience stores and tobacconists. Here in Perth CBD, in the suburbs and in regional WA. It's not uncommon to see people queuing to buy vapes, with children among those lining up.
The McGowan government have been asleep at the wheel when it has come to this significant public health issue.
The Premier says enforcement isn't up to politicians, while a Health Department spokesperson says it is considering legal action against more serious offenders, but cannot comment further. James Carmody, ABC News.
Now, this is another developing story, and there's so much commentary on this as well. And it has taken, the vaping has taken kids like anything. When I go on my morning walks, I can see the packets and the used cartridges thrown all over the place. And it's just not good at all. Now, for the next news, we look at the data threat. Once again, there's so much occurrence of this kind of incidences lately of data theft, and this time someone has got to be very, very out of their minds to go and hack a cancer clinic.
Still unclear whether or not when exactly this group had breached the hospital's system and database, and it's still unclear whether or not authorities are still investigating whether or not any New South Wales health-related data has also been breached during this cyber attack. As you mentioned, authorities did become aware of the cyber breach late yesterday afternoon. Now, this all became very public knowledge when the group claiming to be behind the attack, as you mentioned, Medusa, had listed on their public blog website the Crown Princess Mary Cancer Treatment Centre. It's a facility here within Westmead Hospital in Western Sydney, and that was listed on their leak site. Now, this particular group of hackers has been known to use ransomware to target and steal their victims' data, and then they encrypt that data before threatening to release it unless a bounty is paid. Now, on the leak website, we could see a countdown, as you mentioned, of 7 days for the hospital to respond, and even below that, it had a number of options for the hospital itself. They could either pay $10,000 to buy themselves more time to consider the options. They could also pay $100,000 to have all the data that's been stolen deleted, and on top of that there was a third option to pay $100,000 to download all that data. Now, this group, Medusa, who have claimed to be behind the attack, have been known since the start of this year, targeting Australian and New Zealand organisations. It is the latest financial hack since Latitude Financial was actually hacked back earlier this year. So it is still a major concern, and there are questions whether or not Australia needs to be revisiting its cyber security policy as well. We will get you more details as we learn more about how exactly this hack unfolded throughout the day.
And thank you very much for that report. And as I mentioned before, there is a lot that's happening in that area. And yes, the cybersecurity and the cybersecurity policy needs to be looked at. And that is not one which can be made redundant anytime, because as we progress along with technology, so does the threats. And so it's an ongoing battle, I would say, that it needs to be tackled each and every time. Right now, our lead-out story today is, with the cooler months, right now 15 degrees here in Brisbane, but there's snowfall which is going to be taking place around the Great Dividing Range. And how about that? So, ladies and gentlemen, right now it's time to go to the functions and events. Let's take a look at what's actually happening in and around Brisbane in the weekend. So there you are, ladies and gentlemen, up to date on Australian Indian Radio. Hi, it's been wonderful having your company today on the 5th of the 5th. We know that the whole world is gearing up for that once in a lifetime, once in this century event, the crowning of the king. So, what would you be doing? Would you be watching from home, joining a function, watching it on big screen, or things like that? And as I mentioned, the events start from today here in Brisbane, where this big dinner function being organised at a very, very grand scale at Tattersall's tonight to mark the coronation of the king. Well, ladies and gentlemen, until tomorrow, it's goodbye from us.